Well, then let's start with tattooing, ink, permanence, imaginations and ideas, homelessness, friction in relationship, power, and finding a home or an anchor. There is a Persian poet around the 13th century. His name is Rumi. He came from a very, very religious background. When his father died, he was about 22, 23, and he took over his school. And he had about, 500-600 students. And an old student of his father's one day came to visit him and sat back and listened to him talk a little bit about philosophy and religion, finding a spiritual home, I suppose. And after this young poet's sermon was finished, this old man goes to him and says, "You know, your father taught me a great deal about hidden knowledge or hidden wisdom. You're not really qualified to have students. You're far too young, you're far too raw. But I can teach you a few things." And at the age of 22, 23, he devoted the next 10 years of his life to this guy whose name was Tirmizi. And of course, some years pass. Tirmizi dies. He once again goes back giving sermons, and he is much more cooked. But then at the age of 39 or so, another old man visits his shop as he's giving a talk. And this old man looks at him and says, "No, you're still quite raw." And there was something about this old man that captivated Rumi, that he just gave up everything. And he pursued this old man. They locked themselves in a room for a few months. No one really knows what happened behind closed doors. And when this old man passed away, he wrote about 700 poems dedicated to this man. And it was like this old man was his spiritual father, and without him, he had no home, he had no anchor, he was lost, he was confused. And it seems as if the presence of this old man was the only thing that could ground him, give him identity, meaning, purpose, passion, love. But when he was done with writing these hundreds of poems to his teacher, something very interesting happened to Rumi. He started working on a 7-volume or a 6-volume book called the Masnavi. It's in Persian. You can find translations in English, but they are really, really quite awful. And I say that because I speak the language, I sing the language, I write the language. So when I hear Westerners trying to translate, and in fact do translate, it comes out something that is really strange and weird. For me, it doesn't make any sense, but Westerners like it. People like Coleman Barks make lots of money, or Deepak Chopra, by, saying these are the poems of Rumi. Anyways, in one of the books, he has a story about a tattoo artist and someone who wishes to get a tattoo. Now, before I tell you a little bit about the story, let me just say that Rumi is a teacher of wisdom. He is the Socrates or the Jesus Christ of Iran or Persia. So when we talk about Rumi, always think of Socrates, always think of Jesus Christ. That's, where he belongs in the hierarchy of wisdom and knowledge and what it means to be a relatively decent and insightful human beings. So when we speak about a tattoo artist or a tattoo shop, it's a place you go to get wisdom. That it's an ink that once it enters into you, you can't burn it away. You can't get rid of it. It's there for life. Later on, of course, there came a mystical group we call the Naqshbandis. Naqsh in Persian means design, and they are also one of the original designers or tattoo designers, but their tattoo was one of spiritual quality. They argue that the only ink that will never, ever, ever disappear, and the only ink that you will never regret having, is the ink that is used to write on the human heart. And the only thing that's worth being written on the human heart is things that are spiritual, things that a human being can be anchored. It's like, if you happen to be an alcoholic, for whatever the reasons are, you may have gravitated towards drinking. It was a social drink at first, then it becomes habitual until it consumes all of your life and you lose everything. And then one day a friend comes to you and hands you the Bible, and you begin to read the passages, and you realize little by little, it's no longer alcohol you want to consume, it's actually the verses from this good book. And now you have the alcohol competing with the New Testament or the Gospels or the wisdom sayings of Jesus. And as you read, or as you have Jesus as your companion, more frequently you realize alcohol has less power over you. And there comes a point where you pass by a bar or you see alcohol being served, but you have no desire to drink because Jesus is now in your heart. That's your home. So remember, when we speak about the story, a tattoo shop is a place where esoteric or hidden wisdom exists. A tattoo artist is a person who is knowledgeable, who knows how to apply wisdom or knowledge in a very practical way. It's not theory, it's not abstract. It's not simply coming to class and saying a few things about this and that and going home. It's coming to realize that whenever you want to design anything, when you want to give anything to anyone, it requires a good amount of responsibility, a good amount of pain, blood. And remember, you're not simply pouring some ink into some instrument and then injecting it into another human being. The ink lives inside you. You have to bring the ink out of you in form of language, in form of, I suppose, your own presence when it comes to ideas. And then you need to have a student who is also very ready and very receptive. So this young kid one day says to himself, I want to have a tattoo on my right arm. Now, the right arm, of course, stands for being rebellious for the right reasons. In other words, if you happen to be a Marxist, and you have, not Marxist, let me just rephrase that. If you happen to be a very, very devoted and sincere and honest and earnest student of Karl Marx, and you realize that you have spent most of your life satisfying the desires of capitalists, satisfying the desires of your superiors, who basically look at you as something to make money of. For every student who sits in these chairs, the state gives Peralta district about $3,000 to $5,000. When more chairs are occupied by human bodies, the district gets more money. If you happen to be in a four-year school, it jumps from 3 to 5 to about $7,000 to $12,000. So you make money for instructors, you make money for administrators, you make money for the district. Without students, this place would go bankrupt. It's not so much about education, it's all about dollars. So imagine this young man for the first time comes to realize that he has been alienated, he has been used, exploited by powers unseen to him. One day he wakes up and he says, no, I want to reclaim my own life. I want to, as Marx would say, I want to be a species self. Very much like what San Yu said, I looked at my father and I realized he works at a job where his boss doesn't really care for him. He comes home, his wife doesn't really care for him. He himself doesn't really care for himself. He doesn't even care for his job. He hates his job and he's hated it for his entire life. I don't want to be like my old man. I look at my instructors when I go to school. Yes, they have knowledge. Yes, they spit out information, but there is not a single ounce of passion inside them. I don't want to turn out to be like them. He walks around the lake and he observes people's faces and their expression. He says, people are most unhappy. I'm still 15 or 16 or 17. I don't want to turn out like the people out there. And so, for whatever the reasons are, he picks up a pen and he comes to realize he can really sketch well. He first experiments it on a piece of paper, then he experiments it on people's skin, and he says, maybe this is my profession. Maybe I am creative in this sense. Maybe I can own my own life by walking into this particular craft. So, this young man wants his right arm to be tattooed. So right arm means justice. It means you want your life to belong to you, not to anyone else. And what exactly does he want on his right arm? He wants the image of a lion. A lion happens to be symbolic for the king of the jungle, powerful, ferocious, and he wants that. He wants to stand up for people's rights. If there is homelessness, he wants to get rid of it. If there is poverty, he wants to get rid of it. If there is social injustice of any kind, this young man wants to remove it. That's what this young man wants. But what you need to understand is all of us in this class, once in a while, we look at ourselves in the mirror, we look at our lives, and we are profoundly dissatisfied. And if you happen to be very intense in your dissatisfaction, you're not just dissatisfied, you're profoundly angry. You're angry at yourself for having wasted a good amount of time. You're angry at your parents who didn't probably put you on the right path. You're angry at your friends for having deceived you. As the Hindus would say, you're angry especially at your senses because they created Maya, the world of illusion, that you thought this would be a good thing to pursue, only to realize a week or two or three or four later that no, you had a good amount of pleasure, but you came to realize it's been a waste of time. So, and then I suppose you visit Barnes and Nobles and you say, maybe I should go to the self-help section and buy a couple of books or skim through the shelves to see if there are any books out there that are interesting. So I could maybe create this rebelliousness in my own life. So I could go to my boss tomorrow morning and say, I quit this job. I want to go back to school and make something decent of myself. And one of the things that you realize that whenever you have discontent, whenever you're angry at the path that you've been on in your life, you throw a fit and you say to yourself, I want to do something different before I die. I want to look myself in the mirror and be happy with the outcome. So remember, anytime you have a good amount of pain, whether the pain is physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, fantasies and imaginations and desires are created for a better you. You want to reclaim your life. You want to reinvent yourself. And so like this young man who is tired of living the same old boring life and wants to visit the tattoo shop because he assumes that he's a good student of the person who's going to give him a tattoo. You and I too have dreams, but they haven't yet been touched by the journey towards obtaining what we are dreaming for. So this young man goes to the shop thinking that he has a capacity. You're lonely. You're single. It's painful. But you do imagine that you have the capacity to be in a relationship. So you go out there, you form intimacy. And after 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, you come to realize you're not really made for it. Once all of us are touched, you realize that, this is probably not the best path to take. Maybe we should just go back to being ordinary and, the routine of life. You know, it's much easier to sit next to John the Baptist in the New Testament because John the Baptist just pours water over your head. It's something we do on a daily basis. We take showers, we wash our faces, we wash our hands. It's okay. But to sit next to fire, that's a different story. If you want to feel how it feels, if you want to see, observe, experiment how it feels to sit next to someone like Jesus or Muhammad or Lao Tzu or the Buddha, when the stove is hot, just put your tiny finger on it. Just see how that feels. Now imagine if you suffer a good amount of pain, just imagine if you were to sit, or in fact, if you were to be consumed by the whole of fire, it's not going to be fun. So remember, we're always imaginative animals, and in imagination, everything feels good, looks good, and sounds good, and worthy of pursuit. So he opens this door and walks into the shop, and Sonyu, the man who is really good at his craft, he has a great amount of hidden wisdom. But there are no signs on his door that says, we do tattoo here. There are no signs. It's just shop like any other shop. And no one knows that, and he dresses very ordinarily, you know. He doesn't wear a cap, he doesn't wear a gown that makes him look different from other people. And that's the other thing you need to understand, that people who have a great amount of wisdom in them, insight in them, they look very much like the rest of us. Remember the saying of Jesus that a prophet is never welcome in his own town. Why? Because he's like us. He looks like us, quacks like us, eats like us, drinks like us. That's why it's so easy to kind of just slap them, push them around. You know, they're not like Eckhart Tolle or Jordan Peterson, any of these people who go on the stage and they look different than us. They feel different than us. They are bowed to, they are worshipped. But what you have in the story of all these great sages throughout history is that their wisdom is hidden, invisible. You have to become profoundly intimate with them for them to open their shop and then give you some wisdom. Anyways, so this young man looks at Sonyu, our hero of wisdom, and says to him, I'm here to get a tattoo on my right arm. Sonyu says, really? Have you ever had a tattoo before? No, never. And you want a tattoo? Yes. Do you know what pain is? Well, you know, I played soccer, I fell down, you know. Have you ever seen blood coming out of your body? No, not really. You want a tattoo? Yes, but the image of what exactly? I want a lion. See, usually people go there and they get the tattoo of a dollar sign or a bee or a butterfly or a this or a that. But lion, that's an extraordinary thing to want on your body. Imagine that you have a 70-year-old woman coming to your shop and saying, I want to have a bee tattooed on the back of my hand. Say, okay. And why is it that this woman wants a bee on her hand? Well, it was fall, it was cold, it was snowy, everything would look dead. She felt dead. She was depressed, she was lonely, just everything about her was bad. All of a sudden, spring comes forth, flowers are blooming everywhere, and there are bees sitting on every flower, sucking the nectar, going somewhere later on and just vomiting honey. And she says, I am at a stage in my life where I want to suck the marrow out of my life. I no longer want to live in the winter. I don't want to see my life pass by. I want to do something noble with my life. And I want to have a bee tattooed on my arm, because the bee will be a reminder. It'll be like an alarm clock that'll wake me up from forgetfulness, from being asleep, from having forgotten the promise I made to myself a few days earlier, which was, I am tired of having the life sucked out of me by life itself. I have a few good years left to me. And I want to do what is most passionate for me, what is most meaningful for me. And so the bee, whenever I look at it, it'll remind me of my promise. And so she goes and gets the bee. The problem is, after a while, all alarm clocks become normal, become ordinary. It rings and rings and rings, but it fails to wake you up. Many of us in this classroom have had picture frames on the wall of perhaps a father we loved, a mother we loved, a pet we loved. We visited a restaurant where we met our companion who's no longer with us, perhaps, thinking that it's going to inspire a great amount of emotions. We can travel back in time and simply be in the cradle of imagination, be comfortable, be inspired. But no, we look at the frame every single day and it's no longer inspiring, it's no longer exciting. So what you need to understand is the assumption is that if you get something on your skin, and if you were to look at the image on your skin, it's going to remind you of certain moments in your life that inspired you. But that's usually not the case. Usually we just forget. So, two things. Students always imagine that they have the capacity and they have the receptiveness for wisdom. After a long journey, they eventually find a shop. Once they go into the shop, they find the man who has what they're looking for, wisdom. But Sanyu, because he's a really good practitioner, he knows that conversation can only go so far. He looks at this young man and says, "You sure you want a tattoo? You want a line on your arm?" "Yes," says the young man. "Okay, why don't you sit here? Let me get on with my work." He pulls the sleeve up and pours some ink in this instrument. And the moment the needle touches the man's arm, this young man says, "Ow, ow, please." And Sanyu says, "What is it?" "It's painful." "What part of the line are you actually tattooing?" And Sanyu says, "Well, I'm starting with the head." "Why the head?" "You have the ears, you have the eyes, you have the nose, you have the taste. You have the most important senses. As you're walking the lake, you see a young, attractive woman or you see a nice car. What happens when you see something nice? It inspires. You begin to desire, you begin to pursue. What happens when you smell something beautiful? You're walking on college, you've just had Chinese food. 10 minutes later, you walk by an Indian restaurant and the scent of chicken tikka masala just consumes you. And though you're about to throw up because you had so much food, you say, "I want to go in there and have some Indian food now." Do you see? And here's the thing you need to know about practitioners, those who have wisdom and those who have the capacity and the ability and the knowledge and the wisdom to actually bring this wisdom to life inside you. They, in fact, are able to tattoo this wisdom inside you in a way that nothing can ever get rid of it. So this man screams and shouts and looks at our artist and says, "Well, the head is a bit too painful. Can you start with a different part?" Okay. So Sanyu, journeys to a different part of this man's arm and again puts the needle to his arm. And again, this young man says, "Ow!" And again, Sanyu says, "What now? What part of the line are you tattooing now?" "Well, I'm tattooing the tail." No, 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 it's far too painful. Start with a different place. And this continues on and on and on and on until our artist, Sanyu, looks at this young man and says, "There are desires that we have. There is the pursuit towards the desire, and there is the application. These are three different areas. You have every right to desire, and you have every right to pursue, to obtain what you desire. But when it comes to the work itself, to the sacrifice, to the effort, to the dedication, responsibility, suffering and silence, we don't have those components. Maybe you should just leave. Leave my shop and just live with the desire of wanting a tattoo. Now let's tie tattooing to homelessness. Imagine you have a man or a woman living in a tent under a bridge somewhere. And it's complicated in the sense that we don't really know what exactly has taken place in one's life to walk away from everything and to ultimately go to Target, maybe steal a tent, maybe to buy a tent, maybe to have someone buy it for them, and to decide to live in this plastic bag that really does a poor job of protecting your flesh against the heat or the cold. Whatever the history of this particular person, now you see him in a tent. And all of us begin our life, whatever path we take, very innocently and naively. We assume that if we walk the streets and we stretch our arms and ask for a few dollars here, a few dollars there, people are kind enough, generous enough, compassionate enough, decent enough to give us some money. After a while, you realize that people don't even look at you. In fact, they cross to the other side of the street so they don't have to cross by you. And then you grow this bitterness inside you. You're angry, you hate everything, especially people, and you hate yourself as well. Now, there are two kinds of, I suppose, homelessness. You have someone who is homeless, who has a very, very short fuse, that if you just look at them the wrong way, they're ready to come up to you and just push you around and beat you up. And you have another homeless person who's not short. He's actually able to kind of look at you. You look at him in a mean-spirited way. They just laugh at you and leave. What you have then are two people with two completely different capacities to be able to repress their emotions. Now, let me say a couple of things about repression, because you're talking about homelessness, perhaps what it would take to give them a home. Our good friend Sonyu soon will have a newborn. The newborn will not have the capacity or the tools so that when he or she comes out, doesn't scream. All infants, when they come out, they scream. They don't have the tools to keep their pain within themselves. Little by little, something really interesting happens. All of us are born to be savage, and we are soon civilized. If you want 25 French fries and you want to put all of them on your plate, your mom or your dad perhaps very gently spanks the back of your hand and says, "No, honey, one at a time." And little by little, you know how to kind of govern and guide your lust for fries, your greed for fries, and little by little you realize that instead of screaming and shouting, maybe you go to your room and you write, maybe you watch TV, maybe you go for a walk. The fact that you're able to tolerate me having, for the past 20 minutes, ramble on, and I can see on your faces some of you are getting bored, some of you are falling asleep. It's not really your fault. That you have been socialized really, really well. You don't pack up your stuff and leave. You don't raise your hand and you say, Amir, you're boring me. Amir, this is uninteresting. This is how you keep your emotions within you. You're very dignified, you're very respectful. If you want to understand how repression works, go home, grab a pot, put some water in it, put it on the stove, high temperature. Just stand there for about 5 minutes. Little by little, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter until it gets to boiling. Once it boils, it goes all over the place. And then, of course, if you leave it on the stove for long enough, the pot will no longer have any water left in it. All will be evaporated. From the moment that you and I are born to the time that we die, we have no choice but to suffer all sorts of injustices within and without. And you can't scream and shout at every point. Society will chew you and spit you out. You'll be unusable to yourself and other people.